She opened the cupboard and stared at the almost empty shelves. A can of beans, half a bag of flour, some wilted carrots from the Victory Garden out back. Her youngest was asking what was for dinner, and she had no idea what to tell him. It was 1943, and everything, sugar, butter, meat, coffee, canned milk, was rationed. The government said it was necessary, that the troops needed food more than families at home did. She understood that. Her husband was somewhere in France, probably eating out of a tin can in a foxhole, but understanding didn't make it easier when her kids went to bed hungry. She looked down at the ration book in her hand, flipping through pages of stamps she'd already used up for the month. Red stamps for meat, blue stamps for processed foods. The system was so complicated, it took a college degree to figure out. And even when you had the stamps, that didn't mean the stores had the food. How do you feed a family when there's nothing to buy? How do you stretch a pound of ground beef across a week? And what happens when the war ends, but the cupboards are still bare? Before the war, food was just food. You went to the store, bought what you needed, and didn't think much about it. Sure, money was tight for a lot of families. The Depression hadn't been that long ago, but if you had the cash, you could usually get what you wanted. Meat for Sunday dinner, sugar for baking, butter, eggs, milk. The basics were always there. Mothers planned meals around what their families liked, what was in season, what fit the budget. It was simple, familiar, predictable. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and everything changed. By early 1942, the government started talking about rationing. The military needed food, massive amounts of it. Troops overseas, training camps stateside, hospitals, bases. And on top of that, America was sending food to its allies, Britain, Russia, anyone fighting the Axis. That meant less for everyone at home. So, the Office of Price Administration started rolling out a rationing system that would control nearly everything families ate for the next 3.5 years. It started with sugar in May 1942. Each person got half a pound per week, about 8 ounces. That might sound reasonable until you tried to bake a cake, or preserve fruit, or sweeten coffee for a household of 5. Suddenly, sugar became precious. Mothers started hoarding it, stretching it, substituting honey or corn syrup when they could find it. Birthday cakes became smaller, desserts turned into rare luxuries, and kids who'd grown up with candy and soda had to learn what none left meant. Coffee came next, then meat, cheese, butter, canned goods, and fats. By 1943, almost everything in the kitchen was rationed. Each family received ration books filled with stamps, red stamps for meat, butter, and fats, blue stamps for processed foods. The system was so complicated, it took a college degree to figure out. And even when you had the stamps, that didn't mean the stores had the food. Mothers learned to get in line early, sometimes before dawn, just for a chance at a pound of hamburger or a can of tomatoes. The ration board became the most powerful place in town. They issued the stamps, handled complaints, approved exceptions for pregnant women or people with medical conditions. And they had the authority to investigate anyone suspected of hoarding or black market dealing. Neighbors reported neighbors, stores got raided. The whole system ran on a mix of patriotism, peer pressure, and fear. Everyone was supposed to sacrifice equally, but of course that wasn't how it worked. Wealthy families could afford black market goods. People in rural areas could grow their own food or barter with farmers. But mothers in cities, especially poor mothers, had almost no wiggle room. So they adapted, they got creative, they learned to cook things they'd never imagined eating before. Spam became a staple, canned, salty, and available. Organ meats, like liver and kidneys, which most people had avoided, suddenly showed up on dinner tables because they cost fewer ration points. Mothers made mock versions of everything. Mock apple pie with crackers instead of apples. Mock chicken using pork. Mock cream using evaporated milk. Letters from overseas made it harder. Husbands wrote home asking for cookies, asking if the kids were eating well, assuming that life back home was comfortable and safe.
Mothers wrote back and lied. They said everything was fine, the kids were healthy, don't worry about us. They didn't mention the nights they cried over empty cupboards, or the shame they felt standing in a ration line while neighbors whispered. They didn't say that feeding a family had become the hardest job they'd ever done. And then there were the moments of grace. Neighbors sharing what little they had, a farmer sneaking an extra chicken to a struggling mother, community kitchens where women pooled resources and cooked together, small acts of kindness that made the difference between surviving and breaking. The war didn't just test individual families, it tested communities, and in many places, people stepped up. Not everyone, not always, but enough to matter. May 8th, 1945, Germany surrendered. August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered. The war was over. Mothers all across America breathed a sigh of relief and waited for things to go back to normal. The men would come home, the rationing would end, life would be good again. Except it didn't happen that way. Rationing didn't end overnight. Sugar was rationed until 1947. Meat rationing continued into 1946. The supply chains were a mess, and it took years to rebuild. So even after the victory parades and the celebrations, mothers were still standing in line with the ration books, still stretching recipes, still making do. And when their husbands finally did come home, many of them expected a feast. They'd been dreaming of steak, of real butter, of their wife's apple pie. They walked into kitchens that were still half empty and didn't understand why. Some adjusted, some didn't. The disconnect between what soldiers thought home would be and what it actually was caused friction in thousands of households. Mothers who'd been heroes on the home front suddenly felt like failures because they couldn't produce a meal that met expectations. Slowly, the shelves filled again. Rationing ended. Grocery stores restocked. By the early 1950s, America was drowning in abundance. Supermarkets, convenience foods, freezers full of meat. The years of scarcity faded into memory, and a lot of people wanted to forget. Rationing wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic in the way that fighting overseas was. It was just hard, grinding, daily survival. So it got quietly tucked away in history books as a footnote. But the women who lived through it didn't forget. They remembered every trick they'd learned, every recipe they'd invented, every night they'd gone to bed hungry so their kids wouldn't. And decades later, some of them still couldn't throw food away. They saved leftovers obsessively, reused everything, kept their pantries stocked to the brim. Because once you've known what it's like to open a cupboard and find nothing, you never fully trust that it won't happen again. Rationing during World War II wasn't just about food. It was about control, sacrifice, resilience, and the invisible labor of keeping families alive while the world fell apart. It was about mothers who fought a war at the kitchen table, armed with ration books and victory gardens and sheer stubborn determination. They didn't get medals, they didn't get parades, but they kept the home front running, one meal at a time, even when there was almost nothing to cook. She opened the cupboard and stared at the almost empty shelves. A can of beans, half a bag of flour, some wilted carrots from the victory garden out back. And somehow she made it work, because that's what mothers did. They always found a way.